The chronicle of warrior within begins in the suffocating shadow of a primordial nightmare, a sharp and violent departure from the fairy tale wonder of the Sultan's palace. 7 years have passed since the Prince of Persia used the dagger of time to turn back the sands and undo the catastrophe he unleashed. In the eyes of the mortal world, he is a hero who saved a kingdom, but in the eyes of the cosmos, he is a temporal anomaly, a jagged glitch in the tapestry of existence that must be smoothed over. The universe possesses a natural immune system, a terrifying entity known as the Dahaka. The lore of the Dahaka is the foundation of this chapter. It is the guardian of the timeline, a creature of smoke, shadow, and impenetrable darkness that cannot be bargained with, delayed, or killed by any mortal blade. Its sole purpose is to hunt down anyone who dares to alter their fate and erase them from the fabric of reality. For 7 long years, the prince has lived as a fugitive, fleeing across the continents, never sleeping in the same bed twice, and hearing the metallic grinding of the beast's roar in every gust of wind. This relentless pursuit has fundamentally transformed the prince. He is no longer the charismatic, somewhat arrogant youth who sought to impress his father with a trophy. He has become a warrior of shadow, a man defined by the survival instinct in its purest and most brutal form. His eyes are hollowed by exhaustion. His skin is mapped with the scars of 1,000 narrow escapes, and his heart has hardened into a cold stone of pragmatism. The lore emphasizes that the prince's royalty has been stripped away by the sheer weight of his fear. He is a king without a kingdom, a soldier without a cause, fighting only for the right to see the next sunrise. This transition is reflected in his fighting style. He has abandoned the disciplined forms of Persian swordsmanship for a feral, acrobatic violence, utilizing 2 blades to dismember anyone who stands between him and his continued existence. He is a man pushed to the absolute brink of his sanity, and it is this desperation that leads him to seek out a forbidden path. Driven by a rumor whispered in the darkest corners of the world, the prince finds an old philosopher, a man who has studied the forbidden annals of the Ahura and the ancient masters of time. The philosopher reveals the existence of the Island of Time, a place that sits outside the normal flow of history. This island is the birthplace of the sands of time, housing the great fortress where the Empress of Time first forged the substance. The prince's logic is born of a dangerous, circular desperation. If he can travel back to the moment of the sands' creation and prevent them from ever being made, the Dahaka will have no reason to hunt him. In his mind, if the crime of using the sands is never committed because the sands do not exist, the punishment of the Dahaka must cease to be. This marks the prince's ultimate defiance against the divine order. He isn't just trying to outrun his fate anymore. He is trying to perform a surgical strike on history itself to cut his death out of the timeline. The prince charters a ship, manned by a crew of mercenaries who do not understand the cosmic stakes of their voyage, and sets sail into the cursed, mist-shrouded waters of the Mediterranean. As they approach the island, the environment begins to react to the prince's presence. The sky turns a bruised purple, and the waves become violent, as if the world itself is trying to prevent him from reaching the shore. The ship is intercepted by a fleet of dark, obsidian-sailed vessels led by Shadi, a lethal, armor-clad lieutenant of the Empress. The battle that follows on the deck of the ship is a visceral introduction to the new lore of the series. The enemies are no longer just sand monsters. They are the minions of the Empress, creatures of dark matter and ancient magic that fight with a synchronized cruelty. Shadi, a master of the twin blades, represents the Empress's will to enforce fate. She mocks the prince's struggle, telling him that the island will be his tomb before he even sets foot on its soil. The shipwreck is the prince's literal and symbolic baptism into the island's lore. As his vessel is shattered by the dark fleet, the prince is cast into the churning sea, losing his crew, his supplies, and his last connection to the civilized world. He washes ashore on the jagged, barnacle-encrusted rocks of the Island of Time, a place where the air smells of ozone and ancient stone. The architecture of the island is a staggering display of temporal engineering. Built across various peaks and valleys, the fortress is a machine of colossal proportions, filled with traps that have stood for millennia. The lore of the past and present is introduced immediately, the prince discovers the time portals, ancient hubs of energy that allow him to shift between the golden age of the fortress, the past, and its decaying ruins, the present. In the past, the fortress is a gleaming marvel of white marble and lush gardens. In the present, it is a moss-covered, collapsing labyrinth where the very ground feels like it is mourning. The prince's journey into the fortress is driven by the sighting of Shadi, who is retreating toward the inner sanctum. As he pursues her, he begins to realize that the island is not just a factory for the sands, but a prison for the Empress herself. The lore suggests that the Empress, Kaileena, is just as trapped by destiny as the prince is. She has seen the threads of time and knows that a traveler will come from the future to kill her so that the sands can be created from her remains. This creates a tragic, mirroring narrative. The prince is trying to avoid being killed by a beast, while the Empress is trying to avoid being killed by the prince. They are two predestined enemies caught in a causality loop, each act of self-preservation only drawing them closer to the very end they seek to avoid. This is the warrior within, the internal struggle to change who we are in a world that insists we are already finished. The chapter concludes as the prince navigates the crumbling ramparts of the fortress, the silhouette of the Dahaka appearing in the distant mist like a mountain made of smoke. The prince stands at the threshold of a massive, iron-bound gate, his blades drawn and his heart pounding with the frantic rhythm of a cornered animal. He looks at the portal of sands and realizes that there is no turning back. He has entered a realm where the laws of man are irrelevant and the only currency is the blood shed in the pursuit of another hour of life. The air is cold, the shadows are long, and the voice of the old philosopher echoes in his mind. A final warning that your fate is a river. You can change its course, but you can never leave its banks. The prince ignores the warning, stepping into the darkness of the fortress, ready to fight the world, the gods, and himself to secure a future that the universe has already denied him. The story of Warrior Within is not a quest for a throne or a lady. It is a war for the right to exist. The stage is set for a series of temporal shifts and brutal encounters that will test the very limits of what a human being can endure before they become a monster themselves. The sands are waiting, the Empress is watching, and the Dahaka is coming. The second chapter of this jagged epic unfolds within the monolithic interior of the Fortress of Time, a structure that exists as a colossal, clockwork heart pumping the blood of history itself. Having survived the shipwreck and the initial assault on the beaches, the prince finds himself in a realm where the architecture is as much an enemy as the creatures patrolling it. The lore of the fortress centers on its dual nature. Through the use of etheric time portals, the prince is forced to oscillate between two disparate eras. In the past, the fortress is a gleaming pinnacle of engineering, filled with golden light, polished marble, and the rhythmic hum of massive machinery that seems to breathe with the vitality of the Empress's power. In the present, however, the fortress is a desolate, moss-choked tomb. The air is stagnant, the ceilings have collapsed into jagged maws of stone, and the silence is only broken by the skittering of sand leeches and the distant, mournful howl of the wind. The prince's primary motivation in this district is the pursuit of Shadi, the black-clad lieutenant who serves as the Empress's hand of execution. As he chases her through the central hall, he witnesses a confrontation between Shadi and a mysterious woman in red. In a rare act of his former nobility, the prince intervenes, engaging Shadi in a brutal duel atop a precarious stone platform. The lore of this encounter reveals the internal rot within the Empress's court. Shadi is not just a servant, but a terrified captive of fate who believes that by killing the prince, she can end the Empress's tyranny over time. When the prince slays Shadi, he saves the woman in red, who introduces herself as Kaileena. She claims to be a servant of the Empress, tasked with maintaining the fortress's intricate mechanisms. This is the first great deception of the lore. Kaileena is the Empress herself, hiding her identity to manipulate the prince into a series of tasks she believes will lead to his death. To unlock the path to the throne room, the prince must activate the two pillars of the fortress, the mechanical tower and the waterworks. The lore of the mechanical tower is a testament to the clockwork divinity of the ancients. It is a vertical abyss of grinding gears, swinging pendulums, and pressurized steam valves. The prince is forced to climb through the literal guts of time, where a single misstep means being crushed by the relentless forward motion of the fortress's engines. Here, the prince faces the brute, a towering golem of brass and enchanted stone. The lore suggests that these giants were forged using condensed sands, making them mindless extensions of the Empress's will. Fighting the brute is a symbolic struggle. It represents the prince trying to stop a machine that was built to outlast humanity. Conversely, the waterworks provide a hauntingly beautiful contrast. Water in the lore of the island is the anti-sands, the only element that remains pure and resistant to the temporal corruption. The gardens are filled with cascading aqueducts and reflecting pools that serve as the fortress's cooling system. However, the beauty is predatory. The lore of the Garden Tower mentions that the flora here is fed on the life force of intruders, with vines that move like serpents. It is within these gardens that the prince encounters the Dahaka for the first time on the island. The beast's arrival turns the lush environment into a monochrome nightmare. The prince learns a vital piece of lore during this chase. The Dahaka cannot cross flowing water. This revelation turns the waterworks from a mere objective into a sanctuary, the only place on the island where the prince can find a momentary, frantic peace. Throughout his navigation of these towers, the prince begins to notice a recurring, spectral figure watching him from the shadows. The Sand Wraith. This creature, with its glowing eyes and charcoal-colored skin, seems to be a harbinger of doom. Yet it occasionally assists the prince by triggering switches or distracting enemies. The lore of the Wraith is a mystery that haunts the prince's journey, a silent reminder that he is not the only ghost wandering these halls. The prince's internal monologue grows darker as he spends more time in the past. He begins to resent the Empress, not just as an obstacle, but as a mirror of his own arrogance. He believes that by destroying her and the sands, he is performing an act of cosmic justice, unaware that he is merely a pawn in a larger, more tragic cycle of preordained betrayal. As the prince successfully activates both towers, the great gears of the central hall begin to turn, aligning the bridge to the throne room. Kaileena rewards him with a series of enchanted blades, each more lethal than the last, further encouraging his descent into the role of the destroyer. The lore of these blades, the lion sword and the serpent sword, is that they are vessels of the void, designed to drink the life force of their victims. The prince is now fully armed and prepared for what he believes will be his final confrontation. He stands before the massive doors of the Empress's sanctum, the warrior within having completely supplanted the Prince of Babylon. He believes he is about to break his fate, but the lore of the island suggests that the harder one fights against the web of time, the more entangled they become. The chapter ends with the prince stepping into the throne room, a chamber of impossible proportions where the very air is made of golden dust. He sees the hourglass, the progenitor of all his misery, standing tall behind the throne. He is ready to kill the Empress, ready to end the sands, and ready to walk back into a world where the Dahaka is nothing but a bad dream. But as the doors lock behind him, the silent laughter of the sands seems to echo in the chamber, a reminder that on the island of time, the past is never truly behind you, and the future is already written in the dust of the floor. The third act of this dark chronicle unfolds within the throne room of the Empress, a chamber of staggering celestial beauty that serves as the crucible of the Sands creation. Having conquered the mechanical and botanical challenges of the towers, the prince stands before the woman in red, who finally sheds her mask of servitude. The lore of the Empress's reveal is a moment of profound irony. Kaileena admits she is the very deity the prince came to erase. She confesses that she has spent the prince's entire journey trying to kill him through traps and monsters because she, too, has seen her path of destiny. In every vision of her future, a traveler from a distant land arrives to murder her. The prince and Kaileena are revealed as two sides of the same coin, two victims of a deterministic universe, each trying to trade the other's life for their own survival. The warrior within is now forced into a battle of pure desperation against a god who fights with the grace of a dancer and the ferocity of a storm. The duel within the throne room is the first major climax of the game's lore. Kaileena manipulates the environment with sand tornadoes and slows the prince's perception of time, forcing him to fight at the very edge of his mortal limits. The lore of the Empress's combat emphasizes that she is not merely a warrior, but a force of nature. When the prince finally delivers the killing blow, he believes he has achieved the impossible. He stands over her dissolving form, convinced that by slaying the creator of the sands in the past, he has prevented the sands from ever being made in his present. He envisions the Dahaka vanishing into the ether, its hunt concluded. He gathers his strength and begins the journey back to the present-day shoreline, expecting to find a world where his sins have been washed away by the blood of a goddess. However, as the prince navigates the crumbling ruins of the present-day fortress, the lore takes a sickening, horrific turn. He does not find peace, he finds the Dahaka. The beast is not gone. It is more aggressive than ever, cornering him in the flooded catacombs. In a moment of devastating clarity, the prince realizes the fundamental flaw in his logic, a concept known in lore as the grandfather paradox of the sands. By killing Kaileena in the past, he did not prevent the sands. He created them. The lore of the Empress's corpse reveals that the sands of time are literally her remains. By slaying her, her essence scattered and became the very dust that filled the hourglass. The prince didn't break the cycle. He was the primary engine that drove it to completion. He is the reason the Sultan found the sands, the reason his father died, and the reason the Dahaka is hunting him. He is not a hero who changed history. He is the puppet who ensured it happened. This realization breaks the prince's spirit, casting him into the pit of despair. He retreats into the deepest, most lightless foundations of the fortress, a place where the air is cold and the walls bleed shadow. It is here that he finds the tomb of the ancients, an ossuary for the magi who served the empress before the sands were forged. Within this tomb, he discovers a hidden mural that depicts a figure wearing a terrifying, jagged mask. The lore of the Mask of the Wraith is introduced as a forbidden last resort. The mask was created by the Empress as a failsafe, allowing a user to move through time as a spectral entity, existing simultaneously with their past self. The price of this power is absolute. The mask binds itself to the wearer's flesh, slowly draining their life and erasing their identity until they are nothing but a hollow shell of sand and shadow. The prince, with nothing left to lose and the Dahaka's breath on his neck, dons the mask. The transformation is agonizing. His skin turns to ash, his eyes glow with a haunted, ethereal blue, and his voice becomes a chorus of whispers. He becomes the Sand Wraith, the very figure that has been shadowing his movements since he arrived on the island. The lore of the Wraith's perspective is a unique narrative device. The prince must now play through the events of the game again, but from the outside looking in. He sees his past self as a reckless, arrogant fool who is about to kill the Empress and doom the world. As the Wraith, the prince's goal is to find a way to intercept his past self and change the outcome of the battle in the throne room without being detected. This chapter of the lore explores the theme of self-reflection. As the Sand Wraith, the prince sees the Fortress of Time as a witness to his own failures. He watches his past self interact with Kaileena, seeing her fear and realizing that she wasn't a monster, but a woman as terrified of death as he was. He begins to formulate a new plan. He cannot prevent Kaileena's death in the past, but he can force her into the present through a time portal. If she dies in the present timeline, her essence will not be available to be collected by the Maharaja in the past, thus truly preventing the creation of the sands. This is a gamble of double causality, a desperate attempt to outsmart a universe that has already proven it can use his every move against him. The act concludes as the Sand Wraith reaches the sacrificial altar, the point where the Dahaka originally caught the prince. Using the mask's power to manipulate a localized time rift, the Wraith ensures that the Dahaka takes his past self instead of him. This temporal substitution creates a massive shockwave of energy that shatters the mask of the Wraith, returning the prince to his human form but leaving him as the only version of himself in existence. He is now at the final gateway, armed with the knowledge of his mistakes and a heart that is no longer filled with hate, but with a grim, surgical resolve. He heads back toward the throne room for one final confrontation with the Empress, knowing that this time the warrior within must be more than just a killer. He must be a savior of a history that doesn't want to be saved. With the mask of the Wraith shattered and his past self erased by the Dahaka, the prince stands as a unique anomaly within the fortress. He has successfully navigated the labyrinth of causality, but the weight of his actions has left him physically and spiritually frayed. The lore of this chapter focuses on the reclamation of identity. For the first time since arriving on the island, the prince is no longer a passenger to fate. He is its architect. However, the fortress is reacting violently to this temporal displacement. In the present, the walls of the palace begin to bleed the ichor of time, a golden, viscous fluid that causes the environment to shift and warp. To reach the final confrontation, the prince must navigate the cursed library and the mechanical pit, areas where the architecture has become a sentient trap, attempting to reset the timeline by crushing the intruder who broke the cycle. A pivotal discovery occurs within the hidden archives of the Empress. Here, the prince finds the prophecy of the variable, a set of ancient scrolls that speak of a weapon that does not belong to the sands. This is the lore of the water sword, a legendary blade forged by the magi of a forgotten era who foresaw the tyranny of the hourglass. The scrolls explain that the Dahaka, being a creature of shadow and corrupted time, is vulnerable only to the purest element, flowing water. The water sword is not made of metal, but of solidified reflection, a blade that carries the essence of the primal sea. For the prince, finding this sword is the difference between a tragic ending and a true ending. It represents the one piece of the world that the Dahaka cannot account for, a variable that allows the prince to move from survival to rebellion. The search for the sword takes the prince through the sanctuary of the ancients, a breathtaking cathedral of light and water hidden beneath the mechanical gears of the fortress. This area is the most sacred site in the lore, a place where the air is cool and the corruption of the sands cannot reach. The prince must solve a series of environmental puzzles that require him to redirect the fortress's vast aqueducts to fill a central basin. This process is a spiritual cleansing for the character. As he restores the flow of water, he is effectively washing away the filth of his 7-year flight from fate. When he finally draws the water sword from its pedestal, the blade glows with a soft, azure light that momentarily silences the whispers of the sands in his mind. He is now armed with a weapon capable of killing a god's guardian. While the prince searches for the sword, the lore of Kaileena's desperation deepens. From her throne, she senses the shift in the timeline. She realizes that the prince has donned the mask and returned from a future that should not exist. This terrifies her. To the Empress, the prince is no longer just a murderer. He is a temporal plague that refuses to be cured. She begins to use the very last of her power to summon the Griffin of the Void, a massive, spectral beast that guards the bridge to the throne. This battle is the lore's manifestation of institutional resistance, the universe's last attempt to stop the prince before he can reach the catalyst of the sands. The prince defeats the beast not with hate, but with the cold, surgical precision of a man who knows exactly what must be done to save both their lives. The chapter culminates in a tense, final meeting before the gateway of the past. The prince finds Kaileena waiting for him, but instead of drawing his sword to kill her, he attempts the great negotiation. He explains the truth of the sand's creation and the nature of the Dahaka. He offers her a way out. They will travel together into the present timeline. He reasons that if she dies in the present, the sands will never have been available for the Sultan to find in the past, and if she lives, they can both defy the Dahaka together. The lore of this moment is the choice of the warrior. The prince is offering mercy to his greatest enemy, recognizing their shared victimhood. However, Kaileena is too consumed by the visions of the loom to trust him. She believes this is another trick to lure her to her death. This act of the lore explores the theme of inescapable perception. Even though the prince has changed, the history of the world still views him as a killer. The prince realizes that words are no longer enough. He must physically force the timeline to bend. He drives Kaileena through the time portal into the present, effectively dragging the past into a confrontation with the future. This is the convergence of timelines, a cataclysmic event that causes the fortress to begin a final, total collapse. The stone walls crumble into the sea, the gears of the mechanical tower grind to a halt, and the present day becomes the final battlefield for the soul of the prince. As they emerge into the ruins of the present-day throne room, the atmosphere is heavy with the scent of ozone and the approaching storm. The Dahaka is already there, its massive, shadowy form filling the chamber. But this time, the prince does not run. He stands beside Kaileena, the water sword held high, ready to face the creature that has haunted his every waking breath. The lore of Part 4 is the awakening of the rebel. The prince has stopped being a victim of time and has become its master. He is no longer fighting to survive. He is fighting to change the rules of the universe. The fifth chapter of this temporal tragedy brings the prince and Kaileena to the ultimate crossroads of existence. The present-day throne room, now a jagged, open-air ruin overlooking the turbulent sea. The lore of this encounter is defined by the variable of the water sword. For the first time in his 7-year flight, the prince does not retreat when the air turns cold and the monochrome shadow of the Dahaka manifests. The beast arrives not as a hunter, but as a cosmic executioner, tasked with removing the final 2 anomalies from the timeline. The lore of the Dahaka's nature is further expanded here. It is revealed that the creature is a mindless force, a vacuum of time that seeks to fill the holes left by those who should not be alive. By bringing Kaileena into the present, the prince has created a concentration of temporal energy so volatile that the universe must either consume it or be permanently altered. The battle is a symphony of steel and shadow. As the Dahaka lunges for Kaileena, intending to absorb her essence and finalize the creation of the sands within its own void, the prince steps between them. This is the act of ultimate rebellion. Using the water sword, the prince strikes the beast, and for the first time in history, the Dahaka bleeds. The lore of the Azure Light describes how the sword's elemental purity acts as a poison to the creature's shadowy makeup. Each strike from the prince shatters the infallibility of fate. The battle is not just a physical struggle. It is a metaphysical clash between the will of the individual and the law of the universe. Kaileena, seeing the prince risk his life to protect her, finally breaks her own cycle of fear. She joins the fight, using her remaining control over the sands to slow the beast's movements, creating the first true partnership the prince has ever known. The climax of the battle occurs on the precipice of the fortress cliffs. The Dahaka, weakened by the water sword and the presence of the flowing sea below, begins to lose its physical cohesion. The lore of the abyssal dissolution describes the beast's final moments as a chaotic implosion of black smoke and screaming echoes. With one final, coordinated strike, the prince drives the water sword through the Dahaka's core, while Kaileena unleashes a surge of temporal energy that blasts the creature over the edge into the churning waves. Water, the element the beast could never master, finally reclaims it. The guardian of the timeline is destroyed, and with its death, the script of fate is burned to ash. The lore emphasizes that this is a victory without precedent. The prince has killed a god's intent and survived. In the immediate aftermath, the atmosphere of the island shifts from one of predatory dread to a hollow peace. The prince and Kaileena stand amidst the ruins of the present-day fortress, realizing that they are now the architects of the unknown. The lore of the redemption of the Empress is explored as Kaileena looks at her hands, no longer seeing the blood of her destined murderer, but the touch of an ally. She is no longer the cursed deity of the sands, and the prince is no longer the hunted fugitive. However, the cost of their victory is the total erasure of the world's previous history. By preventing the sands from being found in the past, they have undone every event of the first game. The prince's glory, his father's survival, and even the existence of Farah as he knew her. They have won their lives, but they have lost their place in the world. The chapter concludes with the prince and Kaileena building a simple raft from the debris of the fortress, preparing to leave the island of time forever. The lore of the unwritten future is the primary theme here. As they sail away, the prince looks back at the crumbling fortress and realizes that the warrior within has finally found rest. He is no longer driven by the frantic need to survive, but by a quiet curiosity about what a life without a predetermined path looks like. He has traded the dagger of time for the water sword, and his fear for freedom. But as the island disappears into the mist, a final, chilling piece of lore is revealed: the echo of the vizier. Because the sands were never created, the vizier was never killed by the prince in India. The lore suggests that while the prince was busy fighting the Dahaka, the vizier was busy conquering the vulnerable kingdoms of the east. The prince's victory over his own fate has inadvertently paved the way for a new, perhaps more human, catastrophe. The weight of choice returns to haunt the prince as he looks toward the horizon. He has saved himself, but in doing so, he may have abandoned his kingdom to a monster he thought he had already defeated. The journey toward Babylon begins, not as a return to glory, but as a march toward a reckoning that the prince never saw coming. The sixth chapter of the lore shifts from the claustrophobic, stone-heavy atmosphere of the island of time to the vast, open uncertainty of the Mediterranean Sea. The prince and Kaileena sail toward the east on a vessel forged from the remnants of the Dark Fleet, a journey that represents the interregnum of fate. For the first time in nearly a decade, the prince is not being chased. The lore of the calm before the storm explores the burgeoning relationship between these two survivors. They are chronological outcasts, beings who exist in a timeline that was never meant to accommodate them. As they talk, the prince shares stories of the Babylon that was, while Kaileena reveals the secrets of the ancient Magi. This travel period serves as a crucial character beat. It is the first time the prince has been able to define himself by something other than his sword or his fear. However, the lore of the shattered timeline begins to manifest through the prince's dreams. As they draw closer to the Persian coast, the visions of the unmade haunt his sleep. Because the prince prevented the sands from ever being created the entire decade of his life, his heroism at the Sultan's palace, his relationship with Farah, and even his father's victory over the Maharaja has been erased from the memory of the world. He is returning to a kingdom that has no record of his deeds. The lore suggests that while the prince has kept his soul, he has lost his legacy. He is a king of nowhere, returning to a land that may not even remember his name. This psychological weight is the true price of the water sword. He has traded his history for his heartbeat. As the spires of Babylon finally appear on the horizon, the tone of the lore shifts from quiet reflection to a mounting, visceral dread. The city is not as the prince left it. Instead of the golden banners of House Shahriman, the sky is choked with a thick, sulfurous haze. The lore of the new war is introduced through the sight of the harbor. Babylon is under a massive, systematic siege. The architecture of the city, once a symbol of order, is being torn apart by colossal mechanical engines that bear a striking, horrific resemblance to the tech scene in the island's mechanical tower. The prince realizes that his interference with time has left a power vacuum in the east. Without the sands to distract or destroy the neighboring empires, a new, terrestrial evil has risen to fill the void. The most devastating lore revelation occurs when the prince witnesses the standard of the vizier flying over the palace. In the original timeline, the vizier died at the end of the first game, a victim of his own greed and the prince's intervention. But in this corrected reality, the vizier was never exposed. He remained the chief advisor to the Maharaja, eventually orchestrating a coup and launching a campaign of absolute conquest across Persia. The lore of the vizier's resurrection is a grim irony. By saving himself from the Dahaka, the prince has inadvertently granted his greatest human enemy a life of unchecked power. The vizier has spent these years searching for the very treasures the prince just destroyed on the island, and his frustration at finding the sands missing has turned his invasion of Babylon into a slaughter. The chapter reaches its climax as the prince's ship is fired upon by Babylonian shore batteries, now manned by the vizier's scourge soldiers. As the ship splintered under the weight of the catapult stones, Kaileena is cast into the waves, and the prince is forced to make a harrowing choice: save the empress or save his home. The lore of the broken homecoming emphasizes the prince's total loss of control. He washed ashore not as a conquering hero, but as a drowned rat among the ruins of his father's docks. He finds the streets of Babylon filled with the wailing of the displaced. The people he was born to protect are being rounded up and shackled. The prince sees his father's crown lying in the mud, a symbolic end to the lineage he fought so hard to preserve. The act concludes with the prince standing in the burning shadow of the city gates, looking up at the royal palace. The dark prince, as an internal concept, begins to stir here. The prince's grief and rage at seeing his home destroyed are the perfect fuel for a new kind of corruption. He realizes that the war with the Dahaka was just the beginning. The warrior within has escaped the gods, but now he must face the monsters that men become when they are left to their own devices. He draws the water sword one last time, the azure light reflecting off the smoke of his burning home. He is no longer fighting for his life. He is fighting for the memory of a world he accidentally destroyed. The final chapter of The Warrior Within lore is a haunting meditation on the cost of victory. As the prince drags himself from the wreckage of his ship onto the familiar sands of Babylon, he is met not with the embrace of his father, but with the searing heat of a city in its death throes. The lore of the fall of Babylon is the ultimate manifestation of the prince's hubris. By deleting the sands of time from the past, he effectively removed the great deterrent that had kept the political balance of the East. In the original timeline, the vizier was a desperate, dying old man seeking immortality. In this new, sands-less reality, the vizier is a healthy, invigorated warlord who has used his knowledge of the occult to build a terrifying military machine. The prince stands on the docks, watching his home crumble, realizing that the Dahaka was merely a force of nature, but the vizier is a force of human malice, one that the prince himself allowed to exist. The search for Kaileena becomes the prince's final, desperate mission in this era. He tracks her through the burning lower districts, witnessing the deconstruction of Persian pride. The vizier's soldiers are not just occupiers. They are scavengers, stripping the gold from the domes and the wisdom from the libraries. The lore of the Empress in exile highlights Kaileena's vulnerability. In the Fortress of Time, she was a goddess. Here, in the mortal world of 2026-era logic, where steel and numbers rule, she is a target. She represents the essence of time that the vizier still craves, even if the sands themselves are gone. The prince finds her at the base of the palace walls, but before he can reach her, she is captured by the vizier's elite, Kaileena guards. This moment is the lore's cruel irony. The prince saved her from a cosmic beast only to lose her to a human's greed. A profound lore beat occurs when the prince encounters the remnants of the royal guard. They do not recognize him. To them, he is just another refugee with a strange, glowing sword. This is the total erasure of the hero. The prince has no authority, no title, and no army. He is forced to fight through the city as a ghost, a prince of nothing. The lore emphasizes that his struggle is now purely spiritual. He must decide if he will remain the warrior who only cares about his own survival, or if he will become the prince who cares for his people, even if they have no memory of him. As he watches the vizier's flagship dock at the royal palace, the prince realizes that his father, King Shahraman, is likely already dead, slain by a vizier who never feared the dagger of time. The narrative reaches its final, somber conclusion at the overlook of the Hanging Gardens. As the prince looks down at the carnage, the voice of the old philosopher echoes in his mind for the last time. The lore of the cycle of sacrifice is completed here. The prince has realized that you cannot steal time from the universe without paying a price in blood. He saved his life, but he lost his world. He saved Kaileena, but he delivered her into a new prison. The warrior within has become a man of constant sorrow, a figure of tragic depth who understands that every victory in the past creates a debt in the future. He stands in the embers of his kingdom, the water sword heavy in his hand, looking up at the tower where the vizier waits. The game ends with a lingering shot of the prince's face, half hidden in shadow, half lit by the fires of Babylon. The lore suggests that the prince we knew at the beginning of the trilogy is dead, replaced by this warrior who has seen the beginning and end of time. He has no more sands to turn back, no more portals to hide in. He has only the present moment and the cold reality of the war he has brought home. The final piece of lore is the uncertain dawn. As the screen fades to black, the prince's journey is no longer about escaping fate, but about the grueling, painful process of taking responsibility for it. The story of Warrior Within ends not with a happily ever after, but with a "what have I done?"